All right, looks like we're slowly getting, or quickly getting everybody back in. Great, great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead then and give the opportunity, to hear what the conversations that you all had. We had a great conversation in the breakout room I was in, and so being that I know that Matt Harris took notes and is the reporter for that group, I'm going to start with Matt, and then if you could, after Matt, somebody could raise their hand if they were also a reporter. So go ahead, Matt.
Thanks so much. Our group had a very robust discussion. I have 9 points to mention, but I'll go quickly. This is sort of a concept of what feels right, what's missing from everyone's perspective. One thought was to add something around reaching out to disinvested communities and vulnerable populations. The second thought was to use the data and research that we have already around the region, because we have strong data partners in both San Diego and Imperial counties that, including, for instance, data that shows how impacts of COVID-19 and who is impacted, that sort of thing. We have a lot of data. Go ahead and prioritize using that. There was an interesting conversation around small p politics, if you will, around the fact that groups, and there's some groups, there are many groups that are disadvantaged around the region, but that they have different levels of access and can pull at different levers of the government, have different capacities to pull at different levers of government. And so want to make sure that everyone has equal access. If one of the CERF goals is to shift decision-making power, what can we put together to share those relationships and create new relationships? One question was asked, for instance, how do we determine what's a worthy project? Another was to allow two around language, if you will. One was around allowing the planning process to be provided in actual different languages besides English and Spanish, so that refugee communities, for instance, can access this process in other languages that are not necessarily the two predominant languages in the counties. Another was more of a language around business and around this entire process, that sort of concept that many people may not have gone through processes like this, and to access, I was likening it to reading RFPs and other such documents and understanding processes, and really help people through the business processes, the business language of how to do that. Another was around emphasizing a look across categories. So if you're in healthcare, not necessarily just focusing on healthcare, because there are many other aspects of what we're seeking to do, that, for instance, transportation affects healthcare and the ability to access healthcare. So make sure that the healthcare folks look at transportation. Another one is really a question around the sustainability of the many programs that have been created because of the grant funding, the unprecedented grant funding in the last 2 years that's been provided into the community for new programs to exist. And really the question of whether we want to prioritize or at least call out that some of this could be used to sustain those which are otherwise not sustainable, and not necessarily prioritize that to the exclusion of other new programs, but to say that that is a use and a priority here, because we want some of those really great things that have come out of ARPA and other funding mechanisms to continue and be able to continue into the future. A couple of last ones is a question of access to the planning process should be through multiple doors. Theoretical doors. In other words, you shouldn't just have to go to a 2-hour meeting. Meetings shouldn't be the only way you access this. There should be other ways to participate in the process and engage. And then the last one was really a call out that there should be a priority to try to include youth of 18 to 28 and really let that population be part of the process. So that's our breakout room 2.
Great, thank you so much for that, Matt. Really appreciate that. And somebody else, let me know who else is a reporter that would like to go next.
I can share a little bit.
Great, thank you, Sam.
Yeah, so our group, we had an interesting discussion. The first part of how does this model kind of fit with how you engage with your public already? I mean, I'm I'm probably stating that wrong, but we talked about how our representative from Cal State San Marcos talked about how that's really the model that they use to do community engagement already, and that it's successful. Kind of building an ethic of mutual benefit is really important. And then, you know, just kind of, it's a great way to build connections to better understand the actual community need. We talked about the challenge of collecting this information and reaching the actual stakeholders that we're trying to reach, maybe in that planning process. And we kind of reflected back to what Denise said, just as we went to the breakout groups, about how will we know when we're successful, but kind of building some guideposts in the process to make sure that we're not excluding communities and we're not missing anybody, building in some process for fixing when we're off, you know, like if we start heading in a direction and realizing that we don't have all the voices reflected, especially because the more organized voices can be louder and really grab attention. And so how to look for those, you know, weaknesses in our implementation and be able to adjust back. We talked a lot about, you know, sticking with that needs assessment process and sticking with the, you know, filling those gaps. And then let's see here, if there's anything else. Being transparent about the work and, you know, looking at that collective impact that our data can lead us to, and important research that we need to do, using that research as a guide. I'm sure I missed most of what was important, but that's the best I could do.
Great, thank you so much for that, Sally. Another reporter from another group?
I'll talk about our group here. I was with Stephanie James and Lori. We were really just kind of confused on where to begin. You know, we discussed kind of our take on the framework and what is expected in our group. And then from there, we just kind of said, well, if we could be in charge of what would, I guess, count for this grant, then what would we do? Because that's kind of the best way. And Lori, I'm going to defer to you because I feel like the way your organization, your current focus is really kind of on par with what Stephanie and I and we were talking about. And you said that your organization is developing funding in 3 buckets for talent, small businesses, and thriving households. So maybe you could talk about that, because I know you're going to say it a lot better than I am.
No problem. Thank you. Well, we were just kind of trying to articulate that this grant has a lot of guidance written into it to gear up toward planning and needing a little more of the what we're going to do, which is so hard when you're not there yet, right? We're gearing up for the what. And so in the context of the Boys and Girls Clubs and the service to youth and families in around our county, I was just sharing sort of the lens that our regional economic development organization has said, look, we know that we have a huge talent development deficit in our region, and that we have got to do a better job of giving access and support to our students in San Diego throughout our county so that they have access to educational opportunities. And frankly, if we are successful, we will have a talent surplus. On the small business front, we know that our region has more small businesses than large, disproportionately more in San Diego County than other places in California and in the country. And they don't, as a smaller business under 100 employees, they struggle to pay for benefits, they struggle to pay high wages. And this then only exacerbates what we know is a very high cost of living. And so our third pillar of our work focuses on thriving households, and that being access to quality daycare and preschool. And we know we don't have enough of that. We know that public transportation system throughout our county is not completely accessible, and that gas just got ridiculously more expensive. And then I don't have to share housing costs with anybody. But combined, those three things make it very difficult for far too many families in our county. And we have numbers to back this up. And so as a regional organization, we would look at the work, for example, of the Boys and Girls Club as really hitting on that thriving families piece and on the talent space. And so I was just trying to give some context for the kinds of ways that you define economic development in 2021, which might be very different than 10 years ago. And so when the state put out these guidelines, it is an economic development grant at the end of the day, but that definition of terms has evolved and is much broader. So we didn't get to the list quite the same way as those first two groups did, but I think we needed some framing to sort of help us see where our individual organizations fit into that mix. And as I look around the screen, I know every one of our groups fit into that space somewhere, so, or multiple places.
Great. Thank you, Lori, for that, and Samantha. Moving on to the next group, do we have?
Rocky?
Yes,
Tim.
Tim? Go ahead, Tim.
Yes, I think we started our group by questioning why we were in that group and what our role was. And so what we decided to do is just jump into the question of whether trying to move a project forward, if it was going to be using the CERF model. And so we had a discussion around that. And so we had Lori from the San Diego Green Infrastructure Consortium, and we also had the Ricardo with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and me with Imperial Valley EDC and Wellness Foundation. And so one of the things we talked about is how you move a project forward. And we actually used the first scenario was with the Boys and Girls Club, is how we could utilize the Boys and Girls Club in San Diego and Imperial County, and as a way to help convene people, but also identifying what the needs were and how an organization like the Boys and Girls Club could provide some of those needs. And some of the issues that were brought up were health, drug abuse, and financial literacy. And so if there was, whether we're looking at a local level for a local chamber, or excuse me, a local Boys and Girls Club, and then expanding that and saying, is this something that affects other regions or other local areas in the region? If, you know, by going through a process, we'd find out if the needs are similar, and we look at things more on a regional perspective. And then we went on to another strategy, and it kind of looked at the one of the programs that's in South County of San Diego, and that is with the P4S Partnership for Success initiative, which is to empower the youth and looking at self-resilience, leadership, self-reliance, leadership, and some others. And that kind of led to a discussion is we are working on a project, how we can incorporate that project into possibly internships or apprenticeships or workforce training programs for providing jobs to the local community for green infrastructure. And then I think we went back to, you know, major issues that are in that area are health, drug abuse, and financial literacy, and how we can convene to find solutions for those issues. The other thing that we discussed is how you deal with, and we put in a scenario of a public project. Say a city council gets together and says, this is what we want, and they bring the community in, they get their feedback. The other one is when you have either a local developer or an outside interest comes in and says, I'm interested in doing a project in your region, and getting the word out there and getting public support. And it was mentioned earlier that, you know, there's organizations that are organized literally to stop projects. How can we engage people to make sure there's consensus as we move projects forward, and then look at the resources that are available? So I think that's kind of what we had time for. But I don't think Lori was that familiar with the CERF model. But as we talked through it, then we developed. There is a CERF guidelines, and what we're trying to do is develop a model that can be used as we go in to try to get public support for projects as we move forward.
Great, thank you for that, Tim. And I don't, is that all the groups, or do we have one more? You have one more, Eric?
I think so. So I'm going to try and do this. So we focused in on this notion about, and kind of really again thought about, we've got the first thing, which is writing our grant for the planning grant, right? Or writing our application for the planning grant. So we took that framework of needs, ideas, and projects. And we think that an organizing framework is to frame the state's investment into looking at needs through 3 lenses, and they overlap. And they're not necessarily great, but they are. So we're going to have geographic needs that are about geographies that have traditionally been excluded from prosperity and growth in our bi-county region. We've also got then kind of socioeconomic communities that may be geographically dispersed or spread over, but there's socioeconomic communities where we've got needs. And then there are topics, heard some on from the other groups, but there are topics and policy issue areas where we also have, are important for advancing equity goals. And we thought that there would be 2 ways in which the planning grant could address them. One, really identifying whether San Diego is at a competitive disadvantage in those areas. We may know that their needs are important, but pardon me, just a second. San Diego and Imperial County, that was a misstatement. So let me correct myself and back up. So the bi-county region. So the bi-county region may be important, but it may be at a competitive advantage, or it may actually be doing better than the state as a whole. So the planning grant would identify places which were lagging behind. And then the planning grant process also would identify either whether there's really existing capacity in the region to implement and take action on those, or whether there's challenges. And one of the things we talked about in our group, and this is interesting, Lori and I need to compare notes over a good glass of Chardonnay, is that childcare is clearly a critically important topic in our region. I think it was the observation in our group that it's like the number 2 priority for a ton of organizations. And so if you were trying to think about an infrastructure to communicate to a whole bunch of childcare providers at once in our regions, that would be hard because there's not one group that sort of centralizes and coordinates. And so what we may identify is that a topic is critical.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. That's, I think, one of the challenges.
But Lori, so then the planning grant would identify that there's a capacity challenge and that then there's opportunities to invest to build capacity, right? So it's important that it isn't just the voices that are speaking, or that, it's kind of like, no, that's my ball to drop, but that the planning grant would absolutely really have some hard-hitting criteria or some, objective criteria to say, no, YMCA, you're doing a great job, but let's be honest, you just don't have that ability to drive, 10,000 more childcare spots. So we need sort of that ability to have that, capacity building. And so that's the way we organized it, geography, communities, topics, and thought that the planning grant could really talk about ways to identify needs and opportunities in those 3 spheres of looking at the bi-county region.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. And again, I think that's all of the groups now, right? I'm not missing any group. Good. Okay, great. Well, again, there's a lot of great information that you all shared, and we have a leadership proposal team that'll review all of this information. Look, I'm glad we recorded it because there's quite a bit of information. And I know that we are out of time, so I'm going to turn it over quickly to Shalini to help close this meeting. So Shalini?
Yeah. I'm going to say one sentence, which is the last bullet on here, because we will share these slides with everyone, which is please reach out, share your follow-up thoughts on the framework, any concerns, ideas for making it better directly by email to me and Roque. The proposal leadership group is going to meet right now after this to debrief, and next week in a discussion session, and you'll get more by email from all of us. So thank you all, and please be in touch and more soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.